Question 1. Tell us about yourself. My name is Nicholas Lowe. I'm 40 years old, originally from Michigan. I have two children, a 19-year-old son and a 20-year-old daughter. Both of them live in California. I am divorced. I am currently employed, and I'm living in South Bend, Indiana. Question 2. When and from where were you released? I was released on June 23rd, 2022 from Indiana Department of Corrections, Westville, Indiana. Question 3. Where are you now? I am currently living in a place called Miller Vet Center in South Bend, Indiana. What has the reentry process been like for you? Question 4. The reentry process has been difficult. So many levels of difficulty. The first level of difficulty, the biggest roadblock I had upon release, was not having documentation, a social security card or a BMV ID card, and I needed one to get the other. So that took some doing. I was able to use a medical record from DOC that had my name and date of birth on it to order the social security card, and I was able to use that when I received it to go get a BMV ID card. But it's been a headache. It was a headache. Those things I feel like they should have been ordered long before my release and put in my packet. Unfortunately, they were not. My birth certificate was, but birth certificate does not help you get a social security card, and birth certificate alone will not establish identity to get a BMV ID card. Although I will say, if you have had a BMV card in the past or a driver's license, the process can be a little bit smoother. I haven't lived in Indiana prior to this, so I was newly established in the state, so I needed every single thing that it requires to get the new real ID. I guess if you've been here and you've had an ID before, it's not quite as difficult, but I couldn't tell you what the difference is. The psychological side of it, being around people, has been a little bit more difficult. I thought that being free in the sense that I could walk about freely as I wanted to would be difficult, but that was actually easy to transition into. It's being around other people in an uncontrolled environment that's most difficult, although I'm adjusting to it. I was incarcerated for 6 years, so not a lot has changed as far as social media and the norms and mores of life. Those are pretty much the same. Technology remains largely the same. So I didn't have a lot of hurdles there. Being in a different state, I was living in Michigan when I was arrested for the crime I committed here in Indiana. That isn't as difficult as I thought it would be. My children, I was raising my children when I was arrested. Now my children are grown. I thought that it would be easier to not have that responsibility at home of raising children when I was released, but it's actually sort of a void after living for so long raising children. It's been a month and a half, and I still sort of have that void of not having my kids at home with me every day, picking them up from school, dropping them off. my mind hasn't really wrapped around the fact that they're adults. Time sort of changes when you're in prison. It moves differently. It moves quicker, but it's almost like in a different realm. It's sort of like life out on the outside is paused, and then when you come back out, you just push play and you begin to fill in the gaps. The gaps don't quite fill in as you move along in prison. It's hard to explain. You learn about things that are going on in the outside world, and you hear about things, but it's still as though you were dropped back in from where you left. And so that takes some adjusting. Um, Learning about how to communicate with people other than prisoners in DOC custody has been, I wouldn't say difficult, but it's been more of a learning process than I thought it would have been. Some of the resources, though, question 6 here, that have been helpful for me to reintegrate. I was blessed to be a veteran, an honorably discharged veteran, and for that, I have a number of benefits. Uh, Thankfully, a resource officer came to Westville Correctional Facility several months before I got released and put me in contact with the individuals where I am now at Miller Vet Center, and they assign you a caseworker. They get you plugged back into the VA health system, medical health, physical health. There's physical therapy. There's weight loss. There's all sorts of resources the VA helps you with. They'll help with transportation. They'll provide that. They'll give you bus passes, or they'll also pay for Lyft or Uber to shuttle you to and from places that the bus won't get you to. So there's a vast amount of resources. They'll help you find employment. They're providing the facility where I'm staying at now, rent free. It's transitional. It's not something it's not an indefinite time. I think the maximum time is 2 years, but my goal is to be out on my own in 6 months. But those resources have made my reentry much, much easier and painless than what I thought they would be. Even knowing I was coming here, I didn't realize the vast amount of resources they have. And this isn't a facility for people being released from prison. This is strictly to help veterans that are homeless. So I think there may be one other individual that's been recently released from prison out of the 15 or so that we have here. It's an application process, and they look into your past and whatnot. But it's been a blessing. It's a nice facility. There's 3 people to a room when it's full. Right now I have 1 roommate. It's quiet at night. We have chores. People are very respectful for the most part of each other. So in that sense, it wasn't a big adjustment from prison life. Having a roommate for the last 6 years, I can see where it would be difficult for people that haven't had a roommate for 6 years to just suddenly come to a place like this and have one all of a sudden. But it's been a pretty easy adjustment for me. Resources that would have been helpful to reintegrate, though, if DOC would order your social security card and birth certificate, I think that should be done as soon as you get to your DOC facility. I think that should be something that's ordered, because it's a very, very painful process to get those documents, unless you have family or friends that have access to your records or your old W-2s or whatnot, then it's not so bad. But if you're coming straight out of prison with nothing but what you had there, it can be next to impossible to get those things. What do I wish was available to me upon my release? That was one thing. Both of those questions are sort of similar. The documents is a big thing. The documents will hold you up for a lot. I mean, I could barely even get a Goodwill discount card without a proper ID. I couldn't join a gym. I couldn't get an employment. Uh, it's very, very, very difficult to get through life without a social security card or a state ID. So that's something that needs to be addressed, certainly. That you have the right documents that you need once you walk out these doors to get a state ID and a social security card, because the DOC ID card that they give you upon release, that does absolutely nothing for you. There's not a place I came to that would accept that as an ID at all. So it's you're walking out with no identification, essentially, and that needs to be addressed. Question 8, what are some of the goals that I am working toward? Well, until recently I was working toward employment, but I'm now in my second week of employment. It's through a temp agency, but it's decent money, and I've actually had several offers for employment, and what I found is that it becomes easier to address being a convicted felon as you move through interviews, as you go from one to the other. You sort of find the right way to transition that conversation into, oh, by the way. And what I found, despite advice that I received in my reentry courses, I think it's honestly better to make sure that that is addressed at some point in the first interview. When I say they, it was the reentry course advised that that's something that should be brought up at some point during not the interview process, but the application process, and that you may want to wait until an offer is made. I think that you should get it out right out in the open toward the end of the interview, so that the interview isn't clouded by that. But I've found several employers that wanted to offer me a position that couldn't, or had offered a position but had to rescind it when the felony background check came back. A lot of them will tell you, a lot of companies have their own rules. Some go back only a certain amount of years. Some only look at a certain amount of crimes, or a certain level of crimes. Some don't care at all. So what you'll hear sometimes is, well, we don't hire convicted felons, or what you hear is, we'll have to see what the background check says. So it can be stressful, and it can be sort of depressing to go to interview after interview after interview to get offered positions and have them rescinded. Like, it wears you down, especially when you're getting them out back to back to back. And that's what I was doing. I was putting in several applications every day. In July of 2022, the economy was pretty strong and jobs were everywhere. So everybody was hiring. And I think because of that, some restrictions have loosened that weren't loosened before. So there's a lot more companies that are willing to hire felons. You just have to find out where they're at. And you just have to be honest with the individual you're interviewing with, because you save yourself a lot of headache waiting for a call back that may not come, or waiting for a call back that's going to come just to be disappointed later when they find out that you have a felony record. So I would advise, again, that you bring that up in that first interview before an offer is made. Um, some of the other goals I'm working toward, I have to get my license. I have my state ID, but I don't have my license. My license was revoked in Michigan before my arrest. And so I've submitted a application to get that overturned. I think it should go pretty well. I'm still waiting. It's been a few weeks, but it can take up to 6 weeks. I think that now that I'm an out-of-state resident, I think they're just gonna reverse the revocation, especially since it's so old. And then I'll have to start the license process from the beginning here in Indiana. But that's my next big goal. And then immediate following that, obviously, is going to be a vehicle. And then the goal right after that is finding my own place to stay. And fortunately, I have the VA and their resources to help me with that too. But what I found too is with HIP, the state Medicaid insurance plan, is they'll also help with homelessness, and they'll also help with transportation to and from medical appointments. So there's a lot of resources there too for things like that. Some final thoughts. I'm grateful to be out. There's no question about that. And as I've said before, the 6 years, not a lot's changed. There wasn't a whole lot to adjust to, I guess you could say. I felt like I came out. When I talked before about how time pauses and unpauses, life just sort of unpaused, and I was able to just sort of continue when I got out, as far as the way you interact. Living and all that is different, obviously, but there needs to be more resources for people getting out of prison. There should be a place for everyone to go when they get out. And the DOC should be doing more than just a 4-day class, and caseworkers shouldn't be overwhelmed so much that they can't help you find a place to go to. I know of people that have been held up from their earliest release date because they couldn't find a place to go to. One individual I knew was held up for nearly a year because he couldn't provide an address for parole. So that's the big thing is people need a place to go to. They need a safe place to go to when they get out. And they need to know what's available to them. I don't know where I'd be without the Miller Vet Center, and I don't know where I'd be without the benefits of being a veteran. And I know a lot of people coming out of prison struggle, and that's hard for me to think about, because when you're released from prison, there's enough that you have to deal with even when things are going great and you do have a place to go to. But the fact that you would have to struggle with homelessness on top of being unemployed, probably struggling financially, probably have struggles. If you're homeless, you're probably having struggles with your family. It's just a very difficult time. And I had all the resources I had, and I still had a very difficult time mentally. And I miss my family. All of them except for my 2 children still don't want to stay in contact with me at all. But I have my 2 children, though they live on the other side of the country. And we communicate So that's made things a bit easier for me. So that's all I have.